So this is the third video in the platformer tutorial. The first video was setting up movement and setting up your platforms. We're using Kenny's platformer pack. We have a pre-made level that's quite short, and you have a kind of an end goal here. We have at the moment, some gems scattered throughout that you can pick up. We have some little saw blades here that you have to jump over, and if you jump on them they damage you. At the top of the screen we have a score counter and a health counter. Reasonably straightforward. And we have, if I press play, we have a game that runs and plays relatively smoothly. So there's a lot more stuff we can do, but what we're going to start off with doing is kind of improving the enemies a bit. Okay? So we're going to improve the enemies a bit. Okay? If I kind of go back to my platforms. So at the moment the enemies are very stationary. Okay? You have some little saw blade scattered throughout. You have some health to regen health. Okay? What we're going to do is we're going to add, just like in the tradition of all the platformers, we're going to add a enemy that actually you can move around. Okay? So in the prefab folder I have this B setup, and the B setup, it's a B with a sprite. You have if I just make this background invisible just so while we work, there's a background setup, and what I've done, I've got a sprite, I've got a circle collider for the main body, which is set as a trigger, and then I have a physical collider as a square just above, and a Rigidbody so that we have force and gravity. And you'll notice that I've turned gravity off for this one, so the gravity scale is 0. Bees fly, they float around, so actually we've got a floating bee. So I've set up this with 2 colliders. The first one is the main collider, which is a trigger for the body, so you can pass through it, and that will damage you. We've also got this box collider at the top, which is a physical collider. And that's designed to be the quintessential platformer trope of jump on it and it will die. Okay? So what we need to do, we need to make some modifications to the enemy script. Okay? So I'm going to drag the script onto the B for a start. Okay? And that wouldn't really do much if we remember the enemy script. Very basic, just says if you hit the trigger, take some damage. Okay? So we're not going to change that. What we're going to do is add to it. Okay? So what we're going to do, we're going to add some behaviour so it moves back and forth. Okay? And we're going to add the behaviour so that when you jump on it, it dies. So first thing first, in our enemy script, I'm going to add an on collision enter 2D. Okay, so we have this on collision enter 2D. Nice and straightforward. We're just going to do almost exactly the same as before. So if the object we're colliding with is tagged player, but instead of getting the health script, we could add a health script to the enemy. We're just going to destroy this game object. Okay, so if the player jumps on the collider or hits the collider, you destroy the game object. What that means is we take a while for it to recompile. As we run across, so if we run past, we take some damage. We jump on it, it gets destroyed. Okay, I'm just going to drag it down a little bit so it's not quite flying so high in the air, which is all well and good, but at the moment it just kind of hovers there. We want it to move. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to add some much more complex logic and some much more complex code to basically check to see if it's moving. Okay, so we're going to add a little bit of a set of variables. So we add a boolean to ask whether it's moving. Okay, because we're reusing this script for all of our enemies at the moment, which have a little boolean, it just says if it's moving. So the movement code only runs if it's tagged as moving. And then what we're going to do, we're going to add a couple of so if you remember back from the first tutorials, the transform is the position, rotation and scale of an object. So what we're going to have some empty objects that act at the left position and the right position. So they're kind of invisible placeholders to say move between these objects. We're going to be using the Rigidbody to move it, so we're going to have a Rigidbody, and we'll want to set the speed as well. Okay. So what we're going to say is if moving, so if the object is going to be moving, because otherwise it won't. We don't tend to have a Rigidbody on stuff that isn't moving. Get the Rigidbody, and let's give it a starting velocity. And we'll give it a speed. Okay. So we get the Rigidbody, okay. So this time, instead of using update, we're going to use fixed update. Okay. So fixed update. So update runs every frame. Fixed update runs a set amount of times per frame per second. Okay. So it will always run a set amount of times. That can be found in the physics settings, but it means that the movement isn't going to be super fast with super high frame rates, super slow with super low frame rates. We could adapt that, but actually it's quite easy to use fixed update. So again, if it's moving, this time what we're going to say is transform position.x. So if the position of the B is greater than the position that we can go to the right, then what we're going to do is we're going to get component sprite render. So sprite render is the bit that actually makes the sprite visible, and we're going to flip its x position. Help so I can type. So we flip its x position, and I'll show you this in a second, just so that it faces the right way. Okay. And we then say give it a velocity in the rightward direction. Else if transform.position.x greater than left position.x, get component so by mistake that should be false. So we give it positive velocity to the right. So if you're wondering what this get component sprite render.flipx bit is, we should go back to Unity for a second. You can see here in the sprite renderer, we have a little function here called flip. Okay? And you can see that if I flip the x, what we're doing is we're flipping it in the x-axis, or along the x-axis. and you can see that if I flip it, it faces this way. So we're going to start off by moving this way. So we're going to keep it flipped this way. Okay. If I go back to the script, okay, just going to add some comments in. Next thing we need to do, we need to recreate a couple of empties. Okay. So what we can do, if we can, let me just go for that again. So if I right click, create empty, and create empty, and what I can do is I can select them both, and up here I can give them a little icon. So those icons are only visible when we're developing and not visible in the main game, and I can kind of position how far along we want to go. So if I go here, that's about kind of where I want to go. I'm going to call them position marker for the B, and then go into the B, and I need to fill in its variables. So I need to give it position markers. I need to tick that it's moving, and I need to give it a speed. We'll give it about a 5. Oops, forgot to unpair the markers. So the markers, as you might have just saw, I forgot to unpair the markers. The markers need to be separate objects, because otherwise, as the B moves, the markers will move, and it will never actually get to that position. Just double check that. So if total x is greater than, that's helpful, isn't it? So less than left position. Very easy to make mistakes with signs and brackets, especially when you're trying to do it quickly. So there we go. So now it bounces back and forth, and if I move across, expertly dodge these saw blades, right? You can see that actually it goes through me and it bounces, and if I turn off my gizmos, so there's a little button here called gizmos. Turn off gizmos. Gizmos let you see things behind the scenes, and they're actually not visible. Okay. So now I have some very basic enemy AI as I just fall off. Here's some basic enemy AI. Okay. You have the basic enemy types. We can, if we want to, say we duplicate them. So select them all, right click, duplicate. We can move them around. Let's have one here, say. And let's duplicate again, and we can have, because they're triggers, they don't actually interfere with any others, but we can put it here, say, and have it, so it's here. I'm just going to add a couple more. Let's add some here. In fact, I might add 2 here. So now we have them. We'll add 1 here. And this one will start off facing the other way, and we'll change its speed so it faces the other way. And there we go, that'll do. Okay. So we now have a bunch of enemies, and if I zoom out, you can see they'll happily move across. You can give them speeds, and this one I messed up somewhere. This one I messed up somewhere, but we'll just put it back, rather than figure out what it is. So we have some very simple enemies added in. The key thing here is that they are quite simple. Right? There's no real AI to them. There's no real kind of actual intelligence. but we can look at that later. That's something we can look into. Okay. At the moment, they're just bees wandering around. Okay. As part of this, one of the things I encourage you to do is go through and change some of the bees, change some of the behaviour, or add another one of the many enemies that are present. So we have flies, there are ladybugs. All would have different behaviour, and all might be able to be killed or approached in different ways. Okay. But for now, actually, we have some simple enemies. Okay. So the final thing I do for this tutorial is basically making it so that you can win. Okay. So that's very straightforward. Here we have a tower, okay, and that's your endpoint. I'm just going to make it so that when you get to the tower, you win. Okay, nice and straightforward. You know, Mario, your princess is not in this castle. Move on to the next level. Move on to whatever you want. Okay. So I'm going to add a new script. I'm going to call it win condition. I'm going to go to edit script, add blank script. Okay. Once more, we're going to use that wonderful Untitled 2D, okay, to say if collision.gameObject.tag equals player. We have the if statement, the check to see if it's the player. If it is the player, then what do we do? Well, we'll just say well, rather than before, we could say load the scene number. Okay. So this gives us a little box that says scene number. Okay. So in this case, it will load scene number, so it will load the same level. Okay. We do that so it's reusable. We can use the script again and again and again because we use it on all sorts of different win conditions. Basically says if this win condition is met, if you've touched it, then load level. Okay. What we could also do is we could once again import the UI libraries. Okay. And we can have a windscreen, so we say sorry, that's my windscreen button. So we can create some text that says windscreen must set active false when the game starts, and when the game ends, we set it active. And we could have some win text, maybe some bigger, 150, best fit, 20. Not the most artistic of text, but still, you win. Let's drag it over a bit. We could add another button that says restart the game. We could do all sorts of different things. That sort of stuff is probably beyond the scope of what we're going to do today. I'm trying to keep this nice and short and keep the whole thing below an hour. But actually, you could look at the idle clicker stuff. You could look at other tutorials for bits and pieces, and adding a button in isn't that difficult. Okay. So now you have a very simple platformer with some enemies, some collectibles, some hearts, a win condition. It's pretty much a complete game. Very simple game, but a complete game. There's more stuff you could do. You could add effects so that when the player takes some damage, it dies, and you do that in the health script. So in take damage, you'd have it so that it plays an effect or change the animation, or all sorts of different things. You could add more collectibles, add some speed pickups. You could do all sorts of different bits and pieces, but what you do is up to you. Okay. At this point, you should be getting more confident to make small changes to your Unity scripts and reuse some bits and pieces. Okay. If you're stuck, feel free to ask for help and reach out to other people. Okay. Thank you for watching Basic Platformer, and next time we'll look through and make a whole different game.